14-term California Congressman Duncan Hunter is our guest. Thank you for being here again with us, sir. Nice to see you. And our studio audience will get the chance to ask questions, and the Congressman will also take questions emailed into our newsroom. First, though, let's head out into the audience. And our first question, if you could stand up, state your name and your hometown.
My name is Olivia Zink, and I live here in Manchester.
Hi, Olivia.
Hi. Thank you so much for your leadership on the strong national defense. I'm really concerned about our federal budget priorities, spending $30 billion a year to modernize and rebuild, modernize and maintain 10,000 nuclear weapons. And the Department of Energy and President Bush are proposing to spend another $150 billion to build a new complex of nuclear weapons. And so what is your position on nuclear weapons? Do you oppose the next generation nuclear weapons, and would you commit to reducing the nuclear stockpile to 1,000, which would not impact our national defense, according to a board of military advisors?
Okay. Well, first, I believe in the Ronald Reagan policy of peace through strength. And interestingly, when Ronald Reagan came into the White House, and I came into office with him as one of the 53 Republican freshmen, we had an attempt by liberal Democrats to freeze our nuclear stockpile where it was. And the problem with that was it would have frozen us in an imbalance with the Russians, because the Soviet Union had been building hundreds and hundreds of SS-18 and SS-17 and SS-19 missiles. So we said, no, we're not going to freeze, we're going to reduce. We stood up to the Soviets when they started to move SS-20 missiles into Western Europe. Ronald Reagan started to move in ground-launched cruise missiles and Pershings. He stood up to them with strategic forces, that is, with nuclear forces. And at some point, the Russians picked up the phone and said, can we talk? And we entered into negotiations which have now actually resulted in a reduction in the nuclear stockpile on both sides. Now, that's because we stood up to them and we didn't start unilaterally reducing American forces. Now, let me tell you why you have to have a new, reliable warhead on our nuclear weapons. We now no longer test our nuclear weapons. And that means that after 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you don't know if your stockpile is reliable. Now, one way that we deter our enemies, and for the entire Cold War, we have deterred other countries, primarily the Soviet Union, from engaging in a nuclear war with us, because they knew we were very, very strong and we had a reliable weapons stockpile. So now we've got these very old systems, and the way we used to test the systems was to go out to Nevada and have tests underground and actually have nuclear tests underground. That told you whether or not they worked. So we'd take out one of our warheads from the stockpile, we'd take it out, we'd test it, and it would work reliably, and we'd say, okay, the systems all work, and so we know that they're reliable. Now we don't test. So there's no way to prove they're reliable without doing an extremely extensive and complex analysis. And we've come to the conclusion that we're simply going to have to build some reliable replacements just because the old ones are very old. And they've been in existence for a long, long time, and we're not sure that some of them will work at some point in the future. So we don't have a reliable weapons stockpile. And I think that people are concerned about safety should also be concerned about having a reliable stockpile that has a good safety apparatus attached to it. Now, with respect to the amount of money that we spend on the military, John Kennedy spent 9% of the nation's GDP on the military. That's 9% of everything that we make in this nation. Ronald Reagan spent 6% of GDP on the military. Today, we're spending about 4% of GDP on the military. The most important obligation that government has to its people is to protect them. And if you don't have national security, you're not going to have social security. And I think in this new era in which we still have terrorists with high technology, which we've seen manifested now in the warfighting theaters of the world, in which we have an Iran which is emerging as a nation that is following the path to develop nuclear weapons. We now have a North Korea that already has some nuclear devices, and they are racing to develop the means to deliver them. You saw the tests that North Korea made where they fired their missiles out into the Pacific Ocean, and they are developing missiles with greater and greater capability to get closer and closer to America's shores. And the TD-2 missile that North Korea launched with enough stages can reach some of American territory. That's a dangerous thing for our country. China is emerging as a new superpower. They're spending lots of money to buy ships, planes and missiles, and they are building now new classes of submarines at an alarming rate. So China is moving into the superpower shoes that have been left by the Soviet Union. So against that backdrop of a very dangerous world, it's important for America to remain strong. I think the most important legacy Ronald Reagan left us was peace through strength. I intend to follow that legacy, and I would not cut back on that expenditure that you've just talked about. I think that's an important expenditure. That's important insurance for the United States.
Let me ask you a follow-up to that. So you've said that military spending under your administration would stay steady and there would never be a cut. But you also are in support of a balanced federal budget with additional revenue which comes from growth, not taxes. So if you're looking at that kind of predicament where you can't guarantee the growth, what programs under your administration would be at risk?
Well, you've got in the discretionary budget, you've got about 50% of the money is military and about 50% of it is discretionary. I would freeze the discretionary, the non-defense discretionary spending, but not cut defense spending. I think the first thing you do is you figure out what it's going to take to defend our nation, and you spend that money, and then you make the allotments for the other programs. But you have to defend the country first. And during the Clinton years, you know, we went into the Clinton administration. In 1991, we had 18 Army divisions. When President Clinton walked out of the White House, we only had 10 Army divisions. We had cut, at that point, we cut the Army almost in half. Now you have everybody, Democrat and Republican, agreeing the Army's too small. And that means when you have operations overseas, you have the same guys having to go over and over again because there aren't enough people to spread the load out. So now the administration is following the recommendation that my committee made them last year, which is to have at least an additional 8 Army brigades. So you have to increase the Army. So the Clinton administration said, we're going to cut government spending, and what they cut primarily was national defense. And we've now found out that's the wrong place to cut. So I would freeze discretionary spending that is non-military, the other half of discretionary spending, but I would not freeze and would not reduce national security spending. That's the most important mission and the most important obligation that I think this government has to its people.